at my chumleys. You look sweet as Jack.
In 2015, we made a show called Under at the Albany.
Dad, where's Mum? She's not in Telford with Auntie Poppy, is she?
It was a story about a girl who's looking for her mum.
Most important of all, my front door key. Don't lose it.
Mum!
But who ends up falling down her own toilet. It was also the real-life history of a group of Victorian scavengers called Toshers.
If you take a wrong turn, we might never find you in the 1,000 miles of watery darkness flowing under this city.
Then in 2019 we were commissioned to make an outdoor show for the Thames Festival with a river theme, and we felt that the Tosher story still had a lot of mileage in it, so that's how we came up with the idea for Creak.
Toshers are a gang, or were a gang, of Victorian sewer scavengers. We discovered an oral history written by a Lewisham woman whose great-great-great-grandfather had been called Jerry Sweetley, and he was a Tosher, part of a gang that went down the sewers at night illegally and dug for treasure, basically through the shit. His account talked about a queen rat who he'd met that was a kind of urban myth around at the time, and this rat was the size of an Alsatian and had the power to turn into a sexy lady and seduce you if you were a Tosher. Anyway, Lewisham Arts had heard about the show and asked if we'd like to make a version of the show for the Thames Festival. We particularly wanted the audiences to get a feel of the river, the power that it had, the area and the kind of hold the river had over the area, what it might feel like to be at the mercy of its floods, its tides, its mud. We obviously couldn't take the show and do it down a sewer, but we did find the nearest thing to it, which was Creekside Discovery Centre. Creekside Discovery Centre is a local wildlife centre on Deptford Creek, the only tidal creek in London, and with actual access for visitors into the creek. Working at Deptford Creek, as part of Creekside, audiences will be able to walk in the river and experience the show from the river itself, which is just what we wanted. We made a short version of the show, funded by 2 local housing associations and Lewisham Arts, and in 2019, Thames Tideway, a big building firm in the area who are making the giant sewer, appropriately enough, funded us to make a long version, or a full-length version of it, which ran at Creekside for 14 shows between September and November. Creak, or Creak. Creak was the story of the Toshers, obviously, which was the story of friendship, trials, poverty, gas explosions, floods, disaster, and basically wading through shit. Creak is also the story of treasure and what to do if you find it. Because we made it in the Wildlife Centre and we spent a lot of time with the volunteers and the centre staff and walking in and around the river, we hopefully absorbed some of the philosophy and feel of the area. Creak is also the story of Deptford, what it used to be like, what it's like now, and the people who live here. There are a number of challenges that you don't get when you're making a show for a theatre, or even if you're making an outdoor show on dry land. So, first of all, we wanted the audiences to go in the river and experience some of the scenes from the river. The low tides, when you can walk through the river, change every day, so the shows could never be at the same time. Some ones had to be scheduled for things like 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, so that was quite tricky. Audiences were capped at 35 maximum because of health and safety issues, walking through mud. The other little challenge was that audiences come in their own shoes, but at some point before they went in the river they had to change into thigh-high waders, 35 people changing into waders, and then when they came out of the river they had to wash their waders and take them off and put their shoes on before they could go anywhere else, and that also took time. So the action of the story had to cover 35 people changing in and out of waders, so it had to be pretty flexible, but we couldn't let them go and do it and then pick the story up. We had to keep their interest and involvement in the story while they were changing, which worked really well, actually. So audiences were taken round the side of the site and they were welcomed by a volunteer, or rather an actor pretending to be a volunteer, and they were put in a role as surveyors. They were told the theatre show had been cancelled, it hadn't been very good anyway, and they were now part of Sadiq Khan's team commissioned to complete a detailed survey of the whole centre, because there had been rumours, very exciting rumours, that an anomaly, some treasure, had been spotted somewhere in the creek, and it was their job to find it and hand it in to the proper authorities. So a kind of slightly surreal tour of the centre started to happen. However, strange characters kept on popping out of the woodwork, or, well, popping out of the centre in various places, outdoors, behind hills, out of the building itself, out of the fabric of the building. The characters were odd. They didn't just look different, they sounded different. They spoke in their own slang, a lot of made-up words and rhyme, and the audience had to find a way to communicate with them. Some of them weren't even human. Some of them were pretty repulsive, actually. And all of them, the non-human, the Toshas, and the audience, and the head surveyor, were all looking for the same thing, the anomaly or the treasure that had turned up in the creek. Guided by the Toshas, the audience were eventually taken for a walk down the creek. Had it drifted downstream? Had it got snagged? Had it caught somewhere? Had the queen rat taken it? Was it lost forever? Finally, the thing everyone was looking for turned up, but it wasn't in the creek, it wasn't in the centre, it wasn't buried in the garden, it was down one of the toilets, of course, because it had come up the sewers, and members of the audience were enlisted to help pull it out of the toilet, which was quite a good scene, quite messy. At the end of the show, the audience could choose what they wanted to do with the thing they'd found. They could leave it where it was, they could give it to the Toshas, or they could turn it over to the authorities, and that would mean the centre would become a museum, the whole place would change, the feeling of the place would change. There weren't really any right answers, it was interesting to see, each show was different. Creak was basically a cross between a treasure hunt and an immersive social adventure. Mostly people just thought it was fun.